You Decide 2008. He is one of the most popular Republican presidential candidates here in Western Washington and on the internet.
And despite a snub from big media, Ron Paul's message of individual responsibility, fiscal conservation, and libertarianism is gaining traction in several states, and it's raking in the cash. Q13 Fox News anchor Maria Arcega-Dunn joins us now with the story.
Well, in the debates, 5 questions in 90 minutes, Congressman Paul clearly received the least amount of attention at last night's Florida debate. But that didn't stop him from getting his point across. Have a listen.
The dollar is crashing. And why? And Tim there suggests that we think of the economy, but not in foreign policy. You can't do that. They're one and the same. That's where all the money's going. We're spending nearly $1 trillion a year overseas maintaining this empire. And then there's never been a war fought without inflation and destruction and devaluation of a currency. And this is what we're doing today to ourselves, is we're literally spending ourselves into oblivion.
Spending ourselves into oblivion. Joining us live from Fort Lauderdale, Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Nice to have you here. Congressman Paul, our country's economic tailspin has replaced the Iraq War as voters' top concern. 2 questions. How did we get to this point? And if elected, what would you do to fix the situation?
Well, we've got to this point because we repeated exactly what we did in the 60s. We claimed in that decade that we could have guns and butter and it wouldn't be a big problem. But the 70s were bad years because we had to pay for the 60s. And that's when we had inflation, the dollar went down, gold went up, interest rates went up to 21%, and the people felt a lot poorer because of the weak economy. We've done the same thing again. We've had guns and butter, expand the welfare state, as well as running this empire. The empire is bigger than ever. But our problem today is that our financial condition is much worse. We're in deep debt. Back then we were a creditor nation. Now we're a debtor nation. And we're not productive. Our productive jobs are going. So we're under a much greater threat today than we were in 1979, 1980, when the dollar had to be rescued then, at that time, by Volcker with these very, very high interest rates. And that's what this weakness in the dollar is signaling. And that means we need to make dramatic changes. We need to cut back spending, reduce taxes, let the market work, and get the Federal Reserve out of the business of trying to run the economy by manipulating interest rates.
Congressman, what about the approved tax rebates? At best, the numbers break down to an additional couple $100s a month. Are these rebates essentially providing a short-term Band-Aid?
Yeah, and it probably won't do all that much. I'm for all kinds of tax cuts. If there are true tax cuts in the package, I'm for those. But there's a lot of appropriation, so that means it's only going to make the problem worse. Appropriating money that we don't have and then borrowing it or printing it, it just compounds our problem. It's sort of like, why don't we have lower interest rates and everybody's going to love it and the markets will love it and they tend to respond favorably for a short while. But how do you lower interest rates? You print more money. The Fed out there generating new credit. And that won't work. That's where the bubble came from. By just pumping more money into the economy, trying to reinflate the bubble, won't work. It does for a while. We'll do it off and on. We've done it for 20 years. But I believe the big correction is on our doorstep, and we have to sort of admit what we're facing and that we need major changes, not tinkering around the edges. $150 billion of new appropriations will do nothing.
Well, the Center for Public Integrity uncovered 935 lies told by the Bush administration in the run-up to the Iraq War. Now, if elected president, would you call for hearings or further investigations?
Yes, we definitely should do that because nobody's been punished for misleading this nation and distorting all the facts. And nobody knows, and certainly I don't know who lied and whether it was deliberate. But, you know, to send kids off to war and die and have 4,000 die and 28,000 severely injured and hundreds of thousands now looking for disability, this is a serious, serious problem. And at the time we were getting ready to go into the war, I warned about this, and I said, you can't go without a declaration and make, this is a serious thing that we're doing. But no, they said, we'll let the president do what he wants. And here we are. We're in this mess. It should be investigated. But most importantly is if it's the serious mistake that I believe it is, we should correct the mistake. That is why my position is, let's get out of there as quickly as possible, bring those troops home. We need to save the money anyway, and it's the only moral and natural thing that we ought to do.
So you would call for investigations. Well,
absolutely.
On the Democratic side, we did mention in the intro how big media has snubbed the so-called second-tier candidates like you and, of course, Congressman Dennis Kucinich. In fact, obviously, we know that Kucinich did withdraw his candidacy on Thursday. What's your reaction to corporate media having the ability to define exactly what passes for a mainstream presidential candidate? I mean, doesn't that really fly in the face of democracy?
It certainly does, and they're irresponsible, but there's no law that can change that. Fortunately, technology is very challenging. And when they do these things, the Internet reaches now a lot of people, not 10, 20,000, but millions of people realize what is going on. And last night, of course, I think Romney had 23 minutes and I had 6, and, there's a big discrepancy there. But fortunately, we do very well after these debates, even with the lesser amount of time. But it's something very unfair about it. But eventually the people will be turned off from that type of reporting, and hopefully we can compete, by going around the media rather than depending on them to do our job.
Well, like I said earlier, 90 minutes, 5 questions, but you did get 2 big rounds of applause. And you do have a sizable following here in Seattle, and we've actually seen a lot of Ron Paul for President signs hanging from interstate overpasses and lawns and those types of things. What would you like to say to all of your supporters here?
But most important thing is a thank you for, giving me their confidence, but also to welcome them into this fight, because a lot of them have known about this for a long time, what I've been doing, but a lot of them are brand new. The young people are just becoming aware of this, and they're becoming aware of how many shortcomings we have in government and why we need to change this direction. And when I ask individuals like this, why do you join me now? And they said, your love of the Constitution, your love of the limited government and personal freedoms, your desire to have a strong national defense without starting wars overseas, all these things come together. So I am so delighted that they're joining. Actually, I was rather pessimistic a year ago and not anxious to do this, not believing there would be a good reception. The reception by individuals like you described out in Seattle is just, to me, overwhelming, because not only do they get out there and do the work, they actually send a lot of money too, and that's a vote of support. So as long as they do that, I'll be staying in the race.
Congressman Ron Paul, live from Fort Lauderdale. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, of course, in the interest of equal time and free speech, we did call and email other candidates and invited them to be on our show. But, of course, we had Congressman Paul join us today, and we really appreciate that.
All right, Maria, thank you.
8:21.